Hey guys, this is Blue Forest. I hope you're doing well. So today we're doing part 5 of the anti-tier list. As I have said before, this is not a ranking system. I am not ranking these bots from best to worst. That is entirely for you to decide. And so today we are going to do the tech class. A few things about the tech class. One is that most of these bots have pretty elaborate kits with lots of different abilities. So this one will probably be a bit longer of a video than some of the other classes. And I should also mention that most of these bots have very interesting and useful SIGs, but perhaps more than most other classes, these are SIGs you're going to want to really invest in to either increase the chance or increase the duration of them. That's one thing to bear in mind with this class for sure. And so I am going to do every tech, including Skywarp. I do have him as a 3-star. I have tested him out in some fights. I will offer more thoughts when I get him as a 5-star, but I am going to include him today. So let's jump in and start with Wheeljack. So Wheeljack is probably the most widely used tech. He is fantastic defensively. He has a lot of debuffs. It makes him very worthwhile in longer fights. He's used a lot in higher level AMs for good reason. So his kit is largely based upon his shield and his upgrades. So his SIG, his force shield, it activates at 75, 50, and 25% health, where he becomes immune from most attacks for a duration of time. Now, I will say that Wheeljack is a bot that you're going to want to invest in the Nano Repair Mastery with if you're using him a lot, because it will significantly increase the duration of his shields. This is what makes him essentially immune for about 1 minute, but it can be a tricky call because Nano Repair is only relevant to him. It's not useful for other bots, and you have to use a lot of defensive points in order to unlock Nano Repair. So if you're using Wheeljack a lot, I would say it's very worthwhile, but if he's not your top tech, I would stay away from Nano Repair because you're going to have to end up diverting points away from other masteries in order to use Nano Repair. So with that said, let's take a look at his upgrades. These are very relevant and critical to his kit. So when you use a heavy, when he transforms, he will activate one of 3 random upgrades. So you cannot control these, but they are random. He gets one of 3 upgrades, and he gets up to 3 of them. He will get a defensive upgrade, which increases damage resistance and increases his chance to stun. He will get the offensive upgrade, which increases attack and increases chance to shock. And then his power upgrade, which increases his power rate and increases his chance to power leak. Now, these are very important because those 3 debuffs, stun, power leak, and shock, his base chance to do those is not very high. It's between a 10 and 60% chance, but the chance goes up with upgrades. So every time you get the corresponding upgrade, the chance to power leak, for example, goes up by 20%. So they're very important. Now, if you are struck by a melee crit when the upgrade is constructing, you will lose it. And if you are struck by a crit heavy or special, once you have an upgrade, you will lose the last upgrade you got. Now, that's fine. You can always get another one, but that is important to bear in mind. Now, when he gets 3 of the same kind of upgrade, either randomly or particularly with his special 3, he will heal, and that's another important part of his kit. His specials are all good in the sense that they can all apply stun, shock, or power leak, or some combination of them. Sometimes you will get all 3. He's got a pretty good special 1. His special 2 is very good. It's quite strong, does a lot of damage. And when you use the special 2, it does randomly replace all of your upgrades. And then a special 3 is very important because it's not strong offensively. It's actually pretty weak. However, all upgrades become the same as the first one, and then that allows you to heal. And he can do some pretty good healing, and that makes him really, really useful in those longer, more difficult fights, okay? So in terms of synergies, he has some good, basic synergies with other Autobots in particular, but it's really the synergy that he gives to other Autobots, which is really good because when you're playing with certain other Autobots, he will give them one random upgrade like the one he has at the start of the fight. So he's very worthwhile to use in Autobot teams. And then I do want to say a few things about Wheeljack. Number one is that his shield is not perfect. So it is very easy to penetrate with DOT. So if the opponent lands a bleed or a shock on you, you are going to lose health. And so you have to remember that. It's not always going to save you in every situation. Like I said, on top of that, if you're not using Nano Repair, his shield will only be for a few seconds in most cases, especially at low sig, right? You might only have it for 2 or 3 seconds at a time, so you do need to be mindful of that. And then I also want to stress the fact that his upgrades are random, right? You cannot control which upgrade you get, and sometimes you're not going to get the upgrade you want in the moment, okay? Now that's fine, because you will usually get, several of them, and you'll often get what you want, and sometimes you'll be stunning and power leaking a lot, but it's not always going to work out exactly as you want it to. So there is a lot of RNG built into Wheeljack's kit. But with that said, very strong, lots of defense, healing, fun to play with, lots of debuffs. And so for that reason, he is very widely used and very worth a look. So next up we have Mirage. Mirage can be an absolute beast. He does phenomenal damage. It does take some time to ramp him up, but once you do that, he can be a serious monster in the right hands, and this makes him very good for longer fights. He's got a very good SIG, so his KERS system gives him buffs when he uses specials. So with his special 1, he gets a ranged speed buff. With his special 2, he will go unblockable on melees, and his special 3 gives him a very large attack boost. Now, again, his SIG, you want to invest in it, because at low SIG, these buffs are not going to last very long. These are time dependent. So if he's at low SIG, you'll only get these bonuses for a few seconds, but if you invest in his SIG, those bonuses will be much longer. He's got a very good heavy because he is immune to ranged hits when he does the heavy, and he purifies burn. And then passively, when he starts the fight, this is important, he enters a power mode where his power rate increases, and then this is what allows him to use his shield, which is really awesome as well. So his shield will significantly reduce damage from specials. So when he is hit by specials, he will take a lot less damage. It significantly decreases crit and range damage, and it also goes up by rank. So when you get up to rank 5 or 6, he's taking minimal damage from specials. This is why when you fight against him, sometimes when you land specials, he seems to take almost no damage. So it's a great layer of protection. And then his specials also have their own built-in little buff. So his special 1, in addition to that range buff he can get, he also has some power burn, so he will drain power on ranged hits. With his special 2, he can apply an attack debuff. And then his special 3, this one is awesome, because he will get an attack boost when evading or dodging attacks and then attacking for the rest of the fight. So his special 3 is a monster. It's one of the best of all of the tech class. It does a lot of damage, but then you're getting that permanent attack boost for the rest of the fight whenever you're evading and then attacking. So that is a really phenomenal part of his kit. And he's also got really good synergies, like the espionage synergy with the bees, speed chasers with bots like Sideswipe, which gives him additional attack when dodging and then attacking, and then sharpshooters with bots like RC and Hound, where he gets extra crits on ranged attacks. So very solid bot, very good defense, but particularly really good offense, especially in mid-length or longer fights, and also very fast-paced and fun to play with, so definitely worth investing in. So next up we have Soundwave. Okay, so Soundwave is an underused, underrated bot. A lot of people kind of ignore him. If you've seen my videos, you know I have him at rank 6, and I also have him at SIG 100. He was my first SIG 100 bot, which was pretty awesome once that finally happened. So Soundwave has a lot going for him. So his SIG is phenomenal. It's one of the best in the game. Again, definitely needs to be at high SIG to make the most of it, but with his SIG, he has his reflective shield, okay? And so once his shield activates, whenever he gets a bar of power, he has a chance to reflect ranged shots, and he can reflect anything ranged, okay? And obviously the opponent is firing off a lot of ranged shots at you, so there's a lot of opportunity for reflection. The nice thing is that when he reflects, he takes no damage, and more importantly, he deals 140% of the original damage when the reflected shots land. So he does a lot of damage with those shots. And it's really fun to see. On top of that, when his shield is active, he has 35% energy resistance, which means that even shots that don't reflect, he will take a lot less damage. And perhaps most importantly, he does not need to be blocking in order for the shield to work. Okay, so that makes it very easy to use, and that means that it can really help you out, particularly if you get hit by a special, right? So if you eat, let's say, a Galvatron Special 2, if you take the first hit, he can still reflect the second hit, even though he's stunned. He can't do anything. So that makes it so fun, so easy to use, and a real lifesaver, okay? I want to highlight his power gain, because it's amazing. He's got one of the best power gain abilities in the game, and pretty unique because it's mostly passive. So his power gain is tied to his heavy and his special 2. You're not going to gain power, with melees and basic shots. But the great thing is that his power gain is passive, so once it activates, you don't have to do anything. It will generate at the same rate, and it's very fast, especially at higher rank, because it does increase with rank. So what you want to do is, first you want to land a heavy, okay? I should mention, his heavy is the best in the game along with Scorp, because it's so hard to dodge. I probably land upwards of 90% of heavies with Soundwave. With most bots, you land a lot less because most heavies in the game are pretty easy to dodge. That is not true with Soundwave. So once you land a heavy, you will passively gain a bar of power. Like I said, it increases by rank. At rank 6, you're going to generate a bar of power every 5.5 seconds. Okay? Once you use a special 2, the power rate goes up, and then you're gaining a bar of power every 5 seconds. Okay, so this is really awesome, and because of that, you can use more specials with him than nearly any other bot in the game. Okay, his specials are also very good because they serve different purposes. His special 1 is not super strong, but he has a high chance to both stun and power leak. The power leak also goes up by rank, so at rank 6, he will leak a full bar of power over 4 seconds. Okay, his special 2, very strong, does lots of damage, and it shocks. And his special 3 is really good because it shocks, and it also has a high chance to both stun and power lock, and he can power lock for 8 seconds, okay? And so when you're in a fight, you land the heavy, and then when you get to a bar of power, you have a couple of choices. If you want power control, you'll generally use that special 1. If you want damage or shock, you'll use the special 2, okay? The great thing about the special 2 is that once you've landed it, you will then generate a special 2 every 10 seconds for as long as you want to do that, right? Because he's gaining a bar of power every 5 seconds once he lands a special 2. So you can just do special 2 after special 2, which is really awesome. Now, if you want to use a special 3, you do have to use a special 2 first, but that's fine because people will usually focus on the special 1 and 2. And I also want to mention with respect to his shock, his special 2 and 3 shock, but his heavy also shocks. And even though you cannot stack the shock, you can refresh it. So every time you land a heavy, it will refresh the timer on the shock, which means that if you're good with him, you can keep the opponent in a nearly perpetual state of shock, which is really good. Okay? Synergy-wise, he has a lot of armor and attack with bots like Ramjet, but he also benefits from all of the Decepticon synergies like Hand of Chaos, the Fallen, so he's very good there. And so he's a bit different. It's a bit of a unique kit, but if you learn to master him, you can do tons of damage, lots and lots of specials, an amazing SIG, lots of stuns, good debuffs. So very worthwhile, and a bot you want to look at if you're looking for another tech to check out. So next up we have Ratchet. So Ratchet is kind of hated. A lot of people don't like him. They think he's bad. The thing is though, Ratchet is a specialist. He has a unique kit, and he is, the most comprehensive healing bot in the game. A lot of people think his damage is terrible. It's actually not terrible. He's not the strongest, that is true. But if you know how to play him right, his damage can be pretty decent as well, okay? So his SIG is a healing SIG. You also want to get it up if you want it to activate often, but it can be great because he will repair the damage taken whenever the opponent lands a big hit equal to 120% or more of attack, which means it'll really save you when you eat a big hit like a special because you can do significant healing with his SIG. Okay, now Ratchet is also a bit of a ranged fighter because ranged hits really matter. They will increase his crit rate and they can shock, and that shock can lead to stuns. And if you know how to play Ratchet well, you can really land stun chains because with ranged shots, he has a 15% chance to stun per stack of shock, which is really helpful, okay? His specials are not the strongest, but they serve different purposes. So his special 1, pretty good chance to stun, which also increases per stack of shock. Really helpful. His special 2, not a strong special offensively, but it's his healing special. So he will repair a portion of damage taken, and he will recover a significant amount of power. I think it's about 25% power that is recovered, which is really nice. And his special 3 is actually quite good. It's a pretty strong special. It does a fair amount of damage. It will shock, and also it increases his crit rate on melees for 16 seconds. He gets a nice crit rate boost. So that can be very helpful in long fights. And then I also want to highlight his healing when he drops below 50% health. Because when he drops in health, you use a heavy, and he will automatically repair health and power over 10 seconds. And so he can heal with his SIG, his special 2, and when he drops below 50% health with his heavy. And you can really see this in longer fights. If you bring him into LOC, you bring him into a fight on one of those lanes and you let yourself get beat up, when he gets to low health, he can come back up to very high health by the end of the fight if you play him well. And so, like I said, he's a specialist, but if you're looking for healing, lots of shock, lots of stuns, very reliable that way, he is not a bad bot. And synergy-wise, he doesn't have a whole lot of incoming synergies that are great, but he gives some very good synergies to other Autobots. So, of course, there is his synergy with OGP, which allows OGP to heal with heavies, which is why you often see them paired together. They are great together. And he can also give healing to bots like Ironhide at the start of the fight. TAC B as well. He'll repair a portion of their health. So, well-rounded bot. Very defensive for sure, but if that's what you're looking for, he is certainly a viable option. So next up we have Blaster. So Blaster is also a specialist, one of the best ranged fighters in the game. If you like to use bots like Starscream or Wasp, you could do very well with Blaster. He is also one, kind of like Mirage, it takes a little bit of time to ramp up his damage, but once you do, he can be a real monster if you know how to use him. His SIG is interesting. It's defensive, so when he is shielded, he will absorb ranged attacks and decrease energy damage. So, I mean, he will significantly minimize that damage on ranged shots, and he also has a chance to heal when the opponent lands, big hits, depending on the attack rating of the hit. It's not a high chance to heal, and it's not a lot of healing, but the chance does double with specials. So sometimes if you get tagged with a special, he will heal some, so there is some protection there. Blaster's kit is largely based upon our amp charges and interference, very important. So Blaster gets amp charges every time he uses specials, and those can be stacked up to 10. So again, this makes him really good in longer fights. And those give him really nice ranged and special damage boosts that increase with the amount of amp charges he has, okay? His heavies are good. They will shock and they do more damage depending upon amp charges. And then I want to talk about interference. So with range shots, he has a 70% chance to land interference for 10 seconds. This means that you will obviously land it often and you can apply it over and over again. This is what makes him such an amazing ranged fighter, and he's also amazing against ranged fighters because you can kind of hang back, fire off a lot of range shots, keep the opponent at a distance, because you're applying interference. It's super helpful and unique to him. And then his shields, so they will activate when he blocks. They're very brief, only a half a second, but they also increase in duration with amp charges. So you can get several seconds of shielding when he has a lot of amp charges. And of course, you can activate his shields repeatedly, which is really nice. And then his specials do serve different purposes. So his special 1 gains up to 2 amp charges. And then he also has a pretty good chance to significantly increase his power flow for 10 seconds. And so this is actually really helpful because you can get that nice power flow boost sometimes repeatedly. His special 2 is really awesome, very strong. As you probably know, it's incredibly hard to dodge. It comes out of nowhere. It is very fast. And it also applies interference for 20 seconds, and it also has a chance to stun for 3 seconds. It's a low chance to stun, but again, that chance goes up depending upon amp charges. And his special 3 is not super strong offensively, but it's interesting because it applies an attack debuff for 20 seconds. And that attack debuff can be stacked depending upon amp charges. So if you use a special 3 with a lot of amp charges, you will apply a significant attack debuff on the opponent for 20 seconds, which is pretty darn good. In terms of synergies, he has armor and attack with bots like RC and Soundwave, and he has the shield amp synergy with Mirage and Rhinox, and of course he gives an amazing synergy to Shockwave, which I will talk about in a moment. So Blaster is another one, not the most widely used, but very worthwhile, particularly if you like ranged fighters. Can do huge damage if you know how to use him, particularly in longer fights, and interference is a very, very useful and unique ability to him. So next up is Rhinox. So Rhinox, very solid bot, another one very dependent upon his shields, very important part of his kit. So his SIG is good in the sense that when he's shielded, he takes a lot less damage with his shields. But more importantly, it causes shock damage to the opponent, when he is struck, when he's shielded. And that is really interesting. It's kind of like Bone Crusher in that sense because he ends up dealing damage when he is attacked. And if you get that SIG up, he can do a ton of passive shock damage. This is what makes him so difficult and annoying to fight against in the left side of AMs or in LOC 2 or 3, because that shock damage can really add up. So he starts the fight with 6 shield buffs. Those can be removed with basic and heavy melees. And when he does have the shields, he of course takes less damage, and then they recharge in about 10 to 11 seconds, so you can see them applied repeatedly. And he also gets burn and shock resistance when he is shielded. His chain gun attacks, so with some of his ranged attacks and his special 2 can bleed, so he's kind of unique that way as a tech bot because he can bleed, and he also does additional damage when he is attacking bleeding targets. He's got a very useful heavy because it gives him some power control, so when you land a ramming heavy, he will drain some power from the opponent and power lock them for 4 seconds. Now, his heavy is a little bit easy to dodge, so sometimes you have to use it several times, but you'll usually get it. And of course, you can power lock them again. So he can be very useful against bots like Megatronus or other bots where you want to be very mindful of their power flow. And then his specials also serve different purposes. So his special 1 has some nullification, so it can nullify certain kinds of buffs. And if you do nullify a buff, you will land a bleed. His special 2 is awesome, his best special for sure, very strong, good chance to bleed, does a lot of damage. His special 3 is not so good at base because it's based upon the health of the opponent, so the higher the health of the opponent, the more damage it will do, but it can also bleed. And then in terms of synergies, he is a Beast Wars character, so if you're using bots like Primal, he fits right in. A lot of people will use Beast Wars teams with Rhinox, particularly for raids or AMs, so he can do very well there. And he also has Weapon Specialist. That's a good synergy with bots like Mixmaster and Ironhide. So he's just reliable, he's strong, he does pretty good damage. He hits pretty hard, he hits, his melees hit harder than a lot of other techs, and he has some power control and he can bleed. So he's certainly quite viable, especially if you're using Beast Wars characters. So next up we have Shockwave. So Shockwave, very reliable, strong bot, widely used as well. Very focused on shocks, of course, as well as his energy charges, and he has some very useful abilities. So his SIG is a healing ability, his Undo, so every time he gains a bar of power, kind of like Megatronus in this way, when he gains a bar of power, he has a chance to activate his SIG, in this case healing, in which case he will recover all the damage taken over the previous 4 seconds. The really good thing about this is that you can get amazing healing if the timing is good. So if you've just eaten a special and then the SIG activates, he will do a lot of healing. So theoretically, you could go from, 1% to 100%. That's obviously not going to happen often, but it could. Now again, at low sig, it's not going to activate all that often, but kind of like Tronus, because you have a chance to activate it every time he has a bar of power, you will see it activate, reasonably frequently, even if his sig is not very high. Okay? Now, blocking is very important to Shockwave because he gains up to 3 energy charges, which are very important for his shocks and his attacks. These last 6 seconds. And also, when he has less than 3 energy charges, he is essentially immune to basic ranged attacks. He has 100% block proficiency when he has less than 3 energy charges and he's blocking basic ranged shots. Okay? Now, his basic ranged shots and his heavy and his special 1 in particular, very good for converting energy charges into shock. He deals lots of shock. Okay? His special 1 will land shock, but it will also drain power. And you can also drain power with his heavy and his basic ranged hits as long as you have consumed energy charges and landed shock. Now, you're not draining a lot of power at first, but it adds up quickly. So I believe he drains 2.6% power every second, and that can be magnified depending on how many stacks of shock you have. And so this means that once you get a lot of shock going, you will drain a lot of power, and that makes him a pretty strong power control bot, makes him very fun to play with. And then his special 2 is really good because it's hard to dodge. A lot of times the opponent will block it, but he will also inflict repair block for 6 seconds, so healing bots will not be able to heal. And he also has armor penetration on the special 2. And then the special 3 is awesome. It's a monster special. It will generate 5 energy charges. It also has repair block for 11 seconds, and it applies a ton of shock. So you can see a ton of health draining from the opponent when you use the special 3. And then I want to highlight his synergies because they're really amazing, probably the best in the game overall. He's got great synergies with bots like Galvatron and OGM, but it's really the synergies with the other tech bots that I want to focus on because he gets a great boost from every other tech bot. And so if you use a full tech team, number 1, he will get 25% attack against demo bots, but more importantly, he will get all these different buffs from the other techs on your team. Now, you do need to be using a full tech team in order for Shocky to benefit, but when you do, he is easily one of the most powerful bots in the game, right? So particularly if you're using Blaster or multiple Blasters, because Blaster will give him additional energy charges that generate automatically. He gets healing from Jetfire. He gets longer shocks from Soundwave. I mean, you put together one of these teams and his damage is absolutely mind-blowing, okay? I mean, there are videos of him doing this like brilliantly. I think the Omega guy, MUFC14, has a great video of a Shocky tech team soloing LOC2 just with Shockwave. Sometimes people will use this kind of team in raids or in time slides. So, even though you're not going to be using this kind of team in every fight, if you use it selectively, it is really phenomenal and very fun to play with. So Shockwave, another widely used tech, very good, lots of damage, good power control, lots of shock, very worthwhile. So next up, we have Jetfire. So Jetfire is an interesting bot with the most unique playstyle in the tech class. You need to be mindful of this because Jetfire is all about the parry, the well-timed blocks. His playstyle is a bit different than the other techs. So if you're using bots like Thundercracker or Dinobot, you could do very well with Jetfire, but you need to ask yourself whether you're willing to learn a new playstyle and whether you have the time and the patience to get very good at parrying. Because if you are, he can be amazing. If you're not, though, you won't do well with him and you'll probably find Jetfire frustrating, okay? So his SIG is good. It's another healing SIG, so when he drops below 75% health, it activates his repair systems, and you can do some repairing when you're blocking. Now, this also needs to be mastered, and again, you want to invest in the SIG because at low SIG, it's not going to be a whole lot of healing. But once you get that SIG up a little bit, you can do meaningful healing over and over again. It's kind of like Galvatron and his charging up of dark energy. You do need to be holding block and pausing, so you do need to get the hang of it. But it's a healing SIG, and healing SIGs are always worthwhile. But I want to focus on his parrying, because if you don't master that, you're not going to do well with Jetfire. Okay, so His parrying, in addition to the relevance to his SIG with blocking and so forth, parrying is absolutely essential because, first of all, it becomes a reflective shield, kind of like Soundwave. It's very different from Soundwave because you do have to land those well-timed blocks, but once you do, you can reflect range shots and they will deal 80% of the original damage. He also gets significant block proficiency. Very nice. He takes a lot less damage, and parrying also gives him energy charges, which are very relevant to his attack, which I will get to in a moment. And it also increases his power rate when he gets those charges. And finally, parrying gives him those stuns, which anybody who's played against him knows that he can stun the opponent when he lands well-timed blocks against melees, right? You will stun the opponent for a second, which can be so frustrating when you play against him. And so you have to master his parry. It's so essential because it does so many things for him. But once you do that, it makes him not only very fun to play with, it makes him, pretty awesome for sure, okay? His heavies are decent, they will inflict shock, and his specials are not the strongest. I mean, Jetfire's base damage, on paper is not great, but it can be ramped up with those energy charges, which of course are related to his parrying, okay? So his special 1 will convert energy charges into a ranged speed and attack bonus for 20 seconds. So if you use a special 1 and you've got a lot of energy charges, you're going to get this huge boost for quite a long time. And if you convert 5 energy charges with a special 1, you will also power lock the opponent for 8 seconds, so he does have some power control. The special 2 is, it's decent, it's not bad, and this activates a shield of his. So when you use the special 2, it will convert energy charges to shield buffs for 20 seconds, and if you convert 5 or more energy charges, it will also inflict repair block for 15 seconds, so kind of like Shockwave, he does have repair block. And then his special 3, not the strongest special, but it will convert his charges to shock. And so if you have a lot of those, you will deal a lot of shock, okay? Now, 2 things I also want to say about Jetfire. One is that you may want to use the enhanced block mastery, and the second is that you may want to look at the stupefy mastery. Those are useful for Jetfire more than any other bot probably. And I do know people who have mastered Jetfire who use those masteries because they give you increased block proficiency and they also increase the duration of stuns. So it's something to think about if you're using Jetfire a lot. And then in terms of synergies, of course, he has the nice synergy that he gives to Shockwave. He gives healing to Shockwave. He has attack and armor with bots like Kickback and Wheeljack. But most importantly, I want to highlight Shield Masters with Mixmaster and Dinobot because it is a parrying synergy where you will drain power when you land those well-timed blocks. So Jetfire, definitely the most unique playstyle in this class. Really good if you're willing to master it. If you're not willing to master it, though, I would probably stay away from him, because you're probably not going to do well with him if you can't land those well-timed blocks. Okay? So finally, we have Skywarp. So like I said, I have him as a 3-star. I have not tested him extensively, but I have used him some. And I also want to say that he is new. And oftentimes when Kabam put out new bots, they're a little bit bugged, they might need a buff. So I'm only going to talk about him in current form. We will see if any changes are made to him. But I will say that Skywarp is an extremely defensive bot, one of the most defensive in the game. So he has a lot of utility, but as far as I can tell, he has very weak offense. Probably the weakest offensively of the techs as he is. So you want to bear that in mind. His SIG I am not a fan of, simply because it is way too limited and circumstantial, right? So with his SIG, he has a chance to evade the last hit of a special. Now, that sounds cool, and when it activates, it does look cool. So if you've seen iNightSky's video on this, you can see it in action. But there's a few problems with it. The first, of course, is that you're only evading the last hit of a special, right? Most specials in the game are multiple hits. And so if you end up eating the first, second hit of a special, well, you're still going to take a lot of damage even if you're evading the final hit. Number two, you want to be evading specials, dodging them in general. You don't want to rely on a SIG. But most importantly, it's only one hit. So unlike a bot like Soundwave, where you can end up reflecting a lot because the opponent is constantly firing shots at you, with Skywarp, it's only one hit of one special, right? I mean, it's not going to be the kind of thing where he's evading all the time. And even at SIG 100, it's only a 75% chance to activate, which is just not good. I mean, you could seriously invest in his SIG and then still not have a guaranteed chance to evade that hit. So I'm not a fan of his SIG. It could help you out occasionally, but I think it could be a lot better than it is. But moving on to his kit. So teleport charges, very important. So he will passively gain one every 12 seconds, up to 3. And he can also gain a teleport charge when he dodges specials, okay? When the opponent attacks, when they land crits, those do have a chance to remove teleport charges, okay? So that is very, very important. Ranged attacks are a very important part of his kit. Because basic range attacks have, I believe, a 20% chance to cause a special attack down debuff for 5 seconds, and then heavies have a 50% chance to cause a special attack down debuff on the opponent for 9 seconds. So those can be useful, cause those debuffs. Teleport attacks in general are what you're going to want to use, with those specials because they make his specials better for sure. Number one, they increase his crit chance. More importantly, they are unblockable, right? So if you do a special 1 or 2 with a teleport charge, they will be unblockable. That's one of the best things about his kit. And they also have a good chance to power lock for 8 seconds. So power control is really, really strong in his kit. And he can also purify burn. So he does have some limited purification. His special 1 will power burn a portion of the opponent's power over 9 seconds. His special 2 gives him a shield. Now, this is another thing I don't really like. It's not a very useful shield because, number 1, it only activates after the special 2, but more importantly, it merely reduces crit damage. So he gets 70% crit damage resistance with the shield. Now, that's okay. It might help a little, but it's definitely not as good or useful of a shield as most of the other shields in this class. So I would like to see that improved. But his special 3 has a very useful ability in the sense that you will power steal 40% of the opponent's power, which is a lot. And if they go to 0 as a result, you will get a 15% power rate buff for the rest of the fight. So that's actually quite useful. Okay, so Skywarp is all about power control, applying debuffs, really good utility. But in the fights that I used him in, even when I was going up against opponents that were not a whole lot stronger than me, he did take quite a while to finish fights. They were longer fights for sure. His offense is weak, and unfortunately, and surprisingly, they did not give him any DOT, so no shock, no bleed, no burn to kind of help make up for it. So I do think he's in need of a buff. I do think some of his abilities need to be kind of fleshed out a bit more. So as he is, like I said, fantastic defensively. He'll be great against bots like Tronus for power control, but he's certainly pretty weak offensively. And so, obviously he's new and he's exciting. He does have new animations. So if you want to play with a new bot, by all means, try to get him. But otherwise, I do think most of the other techs are just going to be more worthwhile, at least for now. And then in terms of synergies, he's also on the weaker side right now. I mean, he does have Decepticon synergies like Seekers. He has a nice special attack buff with Mirage, but otherwise not a whole lot going on. So Skywarp, though, I mean, he's okay, right? And he's a defensive bot, and we'll see what Kabam does with him. So that wraps up the tech class. I hope this is helpful. I will get to the scouts hopefully in a few days. If you have any questions, let me know. And until then, take care of yourselves.